pulling up the questions so I can take a look at them while we're talking.
And we're just kind of like we kind of brainstorm some things. I know like some of them kind of did seem redundant. We can just kind of talk about like the general topics of them. I like wrote down like topics I like to speak to you. It's just kind of like I want to get to kind of like a range of like what kind of questions I would be asking you. Um,
Sure.
it's like
Yeah.
super informal, like it's not serious at all.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
So,
Go for it.
so the first one was kind of like, what are some strategies to cope with staying at home during a pandemic, specifically in like a South Asian household? Um, I know like a lot of parents can kind of be like overbearing or kind of like always like you just study, and like not a lot of having free time to yourself or like time to like relax kind of and like or like other so many other things as well. I was wondering if you had any strategies specifically. Um,
Yeah, for coping and just being able to get away from the family. I think one of the biggest things that we have to our advantage throughout this pandemic and even now is that we have, you know, we live in a state, in an area where the weather is pretty good, right? Probably like 75, 80% of the time. And so one of the biggest things that can be helpful is to be able to take the opportunity to leave the house, right? Whether it's to go for a walk or to meet up with a friend that lives in the neighborhood, taking the time to connect with friends through Zoom calls and things like that, that maybe, especially friends that you maybe haven't had a chance to connect with in a really long period of time. I know that that's something that has been instrumental for my own mental health as well. Just being able to talk to friends, hang out with them, play games, catch up with people that I haven't spoken to in a really long time. And, I know that's not always accessible, is specifically in an Indian household. And so, part of that is also being able to set boundaries, right, with your parents and being able to let them know that this is necessary for you, that you do require privacy and space and the ability to be by yourself. I think a lot of us feel afraid to say that this is what we want. However, if we want to set the tone of what we want our relationship with our parents to look like as we grow older, we want to be able to start setting that tone now, right? Which means, there's this concept of just always sounding like a broken record, right? One thing my mom always asks me is when I lived at home is, why do you need privacy, right? What's the reason for privacy? And I always told her, well, as you know, I'm just somebody that likes some time to myself, and that's just me. That's the personality that I am, and I'm not going to be able to change that, right? And so, sounding like a broken record and being able to give that same message over and over again, and sticking to it, right? So when you set a boundary about what you would like to happen, being able to maintain that boundary, and when that boundary is crossed, being able to call your parents out on it, whatever it might be, right? Even if it's a small action or a big action. Another thing that might come up when you do try to do that is, why do you need to do this with me? Like, I'm your parent, so I should be able to be part of your life, and I should be able to tell you what I want you to do. And the truth is that that's not always going to be the case, right? So being able to articulate that message, I think, is really important, and sticking to the message that you articulate so that your parents don't see you as going back and forth, right? But instead can see that this is something that's consistent. Yeah.
so so you said talking to your parents kind of like about that freedom and stuff like that. So how would you go about that, like specifically as a girl or like a woman in the household, especially like as an older sister, kind of dealing with the gender dynamics, and whereas your brothers may have more freedom than you to go out and do these things that you want to do.
Yeah. One thing I would say is that for those of us that have more progressive brothers, right,
Mm-hmm.
is to be able to rely on them to help you stand up for yourself, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that we are not empowered to stand up for ourselves, but it does make a difference when it comes from someone within the family that, is maybe valued in a higher way than you are. So being able to tell them what's going on, and if you feel that they're individuals that are able to connect with you and listen to what you have to say, then using that help and utilizing their assistance in order to make sure that that your parents understand where you're coming from. And on the other side of things, if it is a brother that maybe is not able to understand, or maybe is more entrenched in those patriarchal notions or those misogynistic notions, then I think that's a little bit of a tougher spot to be in. And that would require maybe reaching out to somebody that is outside of the family, right, to help create that connection and maintain that connection. I work with a variety of Indian clients, and I speak Telugu, which is my native language, and so the clients that I work with that do speak Telugu, I'm oftentimes able to at least get through to their parents and connect with their parents and kind of have a conversation with the parent and the child in the same space, right,
Mhm.
to be able to help them understand each other and get to a better place. And so I think this is where the notion of therapy comes in handy. I know that there's quite a few therapists in the area that speak Hindi, Gujarati, Punjabi, and so with that being, a majority of the population that we have in the area, just being able to maybe find a therapist that can help connect you with your parents. And even if they don't speak the language, finding a therapist that understands the culture can also be just as helpful, right? Because they can kind of integrate the things that they know about American culture and Indian culture, and be able to help build a compromise for both the individual and also their parent, right? So I think it's vital for that person to seek out that therapy on their own, and maybe, work with the therapist to see whether or not they can have their parents attend sessions with them and just be able to have these conversations that are important. Yeah.
Speaking of therapy, that brings me to my next question. How would you even talk to your parents about going to therapy? I know a lot of times your feelings become like invalidated, or like it's like, oh, like just stop, like. And so, how would you like talk to them and tell them that like, this is a real deal and you need to actually see somebody for help?
Yeah, so a couple things here. One is I would ask if that person is working to, get therapy using their own insurance, right? Or are they using their parents' insurance? Because that makes a difference, right? If
Mhm.
you're paying for the therapy yourself, you don't really need to convince your parents that this is something for you, right? You can use your insurance and pay for it and deal with, the comments or the backlash on the other end. If your parents are paying for the insurance, or they're paying for the therapy, or one or the other things, or both, right? Just being able to maybe say, hey, can we have a conversation with this person, right? They're Indian, and I want to be able to have you talk to them and see, whether you can understand the process in the same way that they've been able to explain it to me. So, most therapists, including myself, offer, free 15 to 30-minute consultations, right? And so those can be vital in maybe helping parents understand. So, I know that you're not on board with this, but could you maybe speak with this person and see if they, see if what they say is something that helps you understand that this is something that's needed for me, and the therapist on the other end can reassure the parent that it's not really a session or sessions where I'm trying to change that person's mind or turn them into something different, right? But I'm just there to help understand what they're going through and to be there for them as a support system, right? It's just an additional layer of support than what the family already provides for them. And so hopefully that can be a conversation that's had. And then, the third option is if the parent is still really resistant, even if it comes to having that conversation, and even after the conversation is had with the therapist, finding low cost subsidized options, right, or free options. And there's quite a few therapists in the area that do offer subsidized options. There's, at NC State, there's the community therapy organization called CCERC, CCERC, and they provide low cost options. There is Pfeiffer University in Durham that also provides low cost options. And, these are all virtual options. Plenty of therapy organizations, private practices have therapists that are either interning or have just started out. So maybe they're offering subsidized or free options. And so those could be important for the individual to look into, right? So that they can gain the support that they need, without really feeling like they have to convince their parents for this support. And then, of course, there's so many free resources online. I know there's quite a few. Lately, there's been quite a few accounts that have opened up on Instagram, like Brown Girl Therapy and Brown Girl Trauma. And, I know that that's not a substitute for therapy, but it can certainly be a great way to connect with a community that understands what you're going through, right? As far as like with regards to interracial marriages and relationships, there's a community called South Asian Women in Interracial Relationships that is both on Facebook and on Instagram. And it's a great resource, a great place for people to, especially for Indian women to get into those organizations and talk about their relationships or just read about other people's experiences, because sometimes just having the ability to know that there's other people that are going through what you're going through can be so helpful, right? Another community that I'm thinking about on Facebook is called Brown Girls Rising, which is really, really, um, I'm part of that organization. I just listen to everything that people have to say, and it's really empowering, and it's a really great resource for you to reach out to if you are looking for community support and just really feel like you can't find it within your own community, right? The advent of social media has made it a lot easier for us to be able to connect with those types of resources in that way. So, those are a few different options, just based on what the parents are like.
So you just named a bunch of like female oriented persons online. Do you know of any male oriented or just like a more general audience? Um, like I know like mental health for boys is like something that's even less talked about than just mental health in general. And I was just wondering if like
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know of anything off of the top of my head. I recently just started working as a university chapter manager for an organization called Manmukti. It's Mann Mukti, Mukti, and they do have an Instagram page. They do have a Facebook page, and actually the founders of that organization are all male. So, so the community is a little bit more diverse. They do have a Facebook group as well. It's called Manmukti Community, I believe, and so, it's about erasing or working to erase the stigma that surrounds mental health, specifically within South Asian communities. So hopefully that will be a jump off point for anyone that's male identifying to be able to, you know, maybe put their information out there and also find out whether there's other communities that they can be a part of. But unfortunately, I'm not familiar with quite as many for men. I do acknowledge that that is just as big of an issue within South Asian communities as it is with women. And I think that probably the advent of like mostly women or only organizations is likely because women are more comfortable, socially speaking, to talk about their problems and connect with others about the things that they're going through, which is, it's actually really harmful that there's not so many organizations out there for men that work in the same way, right? Because that makes it even harder for them to receive the support they need and also to feel like their emotions are valid, right? And that they can be vulnerable. So I wish that there were more, and if I find some, I'll definitely be, reaching out to you to let you know.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, okay, so if you see like a friend struggling, how should you approach it? Like someone who you know who has strict parents or has a tough relationship with their brother, or like just like struggling in school in general. Like how should you reach out to them? Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If you feel that you have the ability to reach out to them by being part of their lives, right? By maybe, going to spend time with them in a socially distanced way, or maybe going out with them, taking them, for a walk around the neighborhood or just someplace close by, and you feel that their parents will trust you to be part of their life, right? Maybe taking advantage of that trust and being there for them and providing the support and care that they need, right? Therapy doesn't have to look like sitting in a session and, talking back and forth with somebody that can offer you an unbiased opinion, right? Sometimes when you don't have the privilege of either being able to afford that or having parents that are open about therapy or have don't have any stigma against therapy, you kind of have to rely on the support system that you do have. And so if you are that support system for someone, I would highly encourage just talking to them, just asking them what it is that they need, and finding out whether or not you can connect them with the resources that are there for them, right, that are necessary for them. um, and there is currently there is a domestic violence organization in the Triangle area that is specifically for South Asian women. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Kiran.
Oh,
And yeah, and so they, they can be also very helpful in finding resources for those individuals, not just women, but also those individuals within South Asian communities that maybe feel like they don't have the support that they need at home, or actually the support is emotionally or physically or mentally, psychologically abusive support, right? So it's not really support, it's toxic and manipulative in nature. That organization can be very helpful in being able to provide resources and maybe even funding to help this individual get out of a situation that's dangerous for them. So
um, so probably like the last few questions are just going to be um, like they're really short. What is like a practical way to discuss politics? Like if you have like, I know like sometimes you like have different views. They're kind of maybe more for like conservative or like LGBT is kind of iffy topic, or like even like in light of the vice presidential debate last night, like just like talking about like differing opinions with your parents without becoming an explosive argument.
ooh, that's a hard one. um,
Pretty
I
different.
know one thing that you have to think about is whether or not it's worth it to have that conversation. And what by that, what I mean is there are maybe certain topics that are approachable, right? Maybe not LGBTQIA plus rights, but with regards to, race relations, right? There may be a little bit more of a leeway, a conversation that you feel like you can have that's productive, right? And so being able to recognize what those boundaries are, right? Where the conversation goes from being productive to actually regressive or really, hurtful or harmful to the individual, right? And being able to recognize what those topics are with either individual family members or groups of family members, and trying to stay within those limits, right? Because yes, it is important to have these political conversations because the political is personal and it's important for all of us to talk about it with our families, but also it's important to recognize when something is not serving you and when it's not healthy for your mental or physical health in order to have these conversations, right? And so recognizing where those boundaries are and trying to align within those boundaries to have those conversations, and when you do, approaching them in a, in a respectful manner and in a way that you are knowledgeable about the subject, right? So taking the time to educate yourself about the topics, maybe like knowing what their points are that they're going to throw back at you, and being able to educate them on, counterpoints for those points. And so what does that look like for you? What would it require to educate yourself on those counterpoints? And, how can you see yourself being able to present this information to the people around you? But most importantly is just taking care of your mental health and making sure that you're not putting yourself in a situation where it's dangerous or it can become isolating to have these conversations, right? Because we are in an isolating time, and it would be much harder to be able to deal with the people that you're living with, especially if you are isolated and are isolating further from them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. My last question is practicing good mental health, like mindfulness, like meditation, or like creating a routine, like other than the stuff that you mentioned at the beginning, like going for a walk and stuff. Like, what are specific activities that will help you, I guess, like basically create a routine to continue mindfulness regularly rather than, oh, like I need to work on this now, and kind of just maintaining that mental health.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot of different apps out there on your phone that you can download to keep track of habits, right? Maybe habits that you want to build for yourself. There's a lot of accountability. Again, with the advent of social media, there's a lot of accountability groups out there that are available for you. I know that there is a group called Subtle Curry Traits, I think is what it's called. And it's really meant for Indian people, but there's also one for women. And then there's organizations and subcategories within that. And also like another organization called Little Brown Diary, which is a little bit more, uh, in my personal opinion, it it's a little bit more encompassing than SCT is, right? The SCT group of organizations. And so there's, subgroups for mental health professionals, there's subgroups for individuals that are going through mental health stuff themselves, there's subgroups for neurodiverse individuals, there's subgroups for fitness, there's subgroups for meditation. So being able to, connect with those resources can be helpful, especially if you're looking to connect with other individuals within the South Asian community. And then on a larger scale, there's of course so many communities out there for meditation, for yoga, for, even getting like free yoga classes and things like that. So just being able to reach out and find out what's there, I think is important.